Alright, so water is moving from roots to stems to leaves through xylem, and we just talked about the different structural components of xylem and their differences, vessel elements versus tracheids. So, as we know, water is going to move up through xylem from roots to leaves, which is basically up against the force of gravity. So basically there is a pressure gradient that has to be overcome, and to get water from roots to leaves, pressure gradient driven by gravitational forces, the frictional resistances up along the path between water and the walls of the xylem. And so how do plants overcome that? We're looking at say in trees, for example, that pressure gradient of basically up to 3 megapascals, and that's a significant pressure gradient that water has to overcome. So how is there enough? What are the mechanisms that generate enough pressure to overcome this pressure gradient? One of the means, so these are methods or mechanisms or processes to overcome the pressure gradient from roots to leaves. The first question is that water column, or is water pushed up from the roots? Well, the answer is in part yes. And that is what we refer to as root pressure. Okay, so how is root pressure generated and what are its limitations? Root pressure has a limit to 10 meters. And which is, a pretty significant height, especially in herbaceous plants. But it's, as we're going to see, it's going to be limited in the time of day. So this is an independently energy, or let's say an energy-dependent process, where, remember, solutes or ions are actively transported during root uptake into xylem. And these solutes or ions reach root xylem through with the flow of water. So we've just talked about how water moves radially from the root epidermis into the root xylem, reaching that endodermis if it's through that apoplastic route, or if water is transported across the membrane earlier than that point, then the ions that are dissolved in water are going to be actively transported. They require ATP for uptake. So this concentrates ions in xylem, and as we know, when the xylem has a high solute concentration, then that's going to lower its water potential by lowering its osmotic potential. So as long as the xylem is maintaining a lower water potential, then that's going to drive water towards the xylem from the epidermis versus the higher water potential in the root epidermis and even out into the soil. We'll write soil here too. Okay. Now as water continues to be taken up down this water potential gradient, this increases the water pressure inside of xylem, and that water is going to essentially move upwards through xylem. And that's basically, we're looking at positive pressure. Positive pressure being pushed up. Okay. Now, transpiration, which is what we're going to be looking at shortly here, is actually negative pressure. And so we'll kind of go to the next page here with our notes. And transpiration, which is going to be the primary mechanism pulling water up to the leaves, generates negative pressure. And so we have to keep in mind that this negative pressure or transpiration is more significant in the day. And once that negative pressure is greater in magnitude than the positive pressure that's pushing water up from the roots, then root pressure gets overtaken by transpiration and disappears. So root pressure is limited. Root pressure to nighttime, plus in perennials before leaves emerge in springtime, for certain perennials before they leaf out. Okay. So is it important? Absolutely, and we'll see how root pressure can be important to overcome some of the challenges associated with transpiration. But to keep in mind, and it doesn't happen in all plants, but it primarily occurs at night, and it as well as in spring in some perennials. With regard to the springtime generation of root pressure, we see it, say, in maples, where the xylem sap before the plants leaf out is what we can tap as maple syrup. So that's xylem sap, highly concentrated in solutes, pushing up through the plants, and when we tap that xylem, then it just flows right out. Okay. Now it's evident, here's evidence of the presence of root pressures, where we see the formation of water droplets in the margins of the leaf, which is called guttation. Here it is, G-U-T-T, which is guttation. So if we see in the morning, in the AM hours, the presence of these leaf margin water droplets, then we get an idea that root pressure was occurring. These are these little pores where the water droplets are seeping out of, which are called hydothodes. And again, certain plants have this. Not all plants have it, but it's evidence that root pressure was significant in these sort of lower stature plants. Another situation where root pressure would be important is in tropical regions. So we'll say this is for springtime, and then in tropical regions with high relative humidity. And in regions with high relative humidity, that they're going to have plants with low transpiration rates. And so root pressures might be important for helping maintain that water column in those plants. So root pressure is going to build up enough pressure to push water up with pressures, let's say generating, root pressure generates a pressure of about 0.1 to 0.5 megapascals, which is only a small amount compared to the pressure of 3 megapascals required to move water up from roots to leaves in a 100-meter tall tree. So it's limited in its value, but it is important, and we'll see how it helps plants overcome water stress as well. All right, so if water is essentially in part pushed up, but how about being pulled up? So is the water column pulled up? And being pulled up is where negative pressure comes in. Negative pressure is pulling, positive pressure is pushing. Negative pressure is like suction. So the negative pressures, or negative pressure develops in leaves, which is how water gets pulled up. So one way that that happens is by capillary rise or capillarity. And the second way that we'll be getting to is by the process of transpiration or evapotranspiration. So we're going to concentrate on capillary rise here, and this is limited to 1 meter height to move the water column to up 1 meter. But it's generated or driven by adhesion plus cohesion. Alright, so adhesion, remember, is the attraction between water molecules, the hydrogen bonding between water molecules and other molecules, such as the cellulose molecules in the cell membrane. And so this diagram here would represent, say, xylem, or let's say a trachid with a certain, or vessel element with a certain diameter. And we'll just kind of label these here, B, C, D. And so again, adhesion is the attraction between water molecules in the cellulose, and is going to result in water basically wicking up the sides of the xylem. And cohesion is the attraction between the water molecules themselves, which is going to generate the surface tension, or the tension in the conduit there. So the combination of these two, water wicking up the sides, but the surface, that air liquid surface there being more attracted to the liquid than the air, creates tension or negative pressure. So water tends to be pulled up because of that. Now there is a relationship, or let's say an inverse relationship, between the radius of the conduit and the height of capillary rise. So that means that the smaller the radius, then the higher the capillary rise. So let's look at, for example, that 100-meter tall tree. To have water be transported from roots all the way up to the leaves by capillary rise alone would require a conduit, so like a vessel element, for example, with a diameter of 0.15 micrometers. And if we reflect back on the diameters of tracheids versus vessel elements, we remember that the tracheids have a diameter of 10 to 50 micrometers, vessel elements from starting with 40 on up to 60, even up to 500 micrometers. So there are no vessel elements or tracheids with this diameter. So therefore there must be another mechanism in place that takes water beyond that 1 meter height. To basically pull water up the water column. So that's the topic that we'll be coming to next, which is explained by the cohesion tension theory. So that's our next topic, where we talk about evapotranspiration.